Good evening and welcome to the Square. A very warm evening to all of you. Apologies, I'd like to just apologize for kicking off late due to some technical issues. So tonight is the burning edition issues of the Square, and this is where we, the resident panelists, just the three of us, no guests, talk about issues or talk on issues that you put forward. You, the public, our viewers, have put forward through social media, topics that we are going to discuss. This, as you know, happens every last Wednesday of the month. Today is the last Wednesday of the year, the last edition of the Square of the Year, and I think we're very excited with the content that we're here to discuss between Brenna, myself, and Charles. Burning Issues Edition 16, and the general topic for today is looking at the year 2020 and what a year it's been. We're going to talk about a couple of things. The first is just looking at the AFCFTA, Africa Continental Free Trade Area, as looking at geopolitics in the region and beyond, as well as COVID-19. We're also going to touch on the Rwandan economy and key investments this year, as well as lessons learned in 2020, as well as personal expectations from the panelists in the year 2021. My name is Dan Mpisi, the host of the Square, always joined by the resident panelists, and I'll start with you, Charles. Haba, great to have you on the show.
Samia, Diana, how are you?
Good.
Good.
Also, resident panelist on the show is Brenna Namata. Great to have you as always on the show, Brenna.
Thank you, Diana.
I think in the interest of time, we won't do our midweek highlights that Brenna and Charles always share. We're just going to dive straight into the show. So just like I said, the first issue we're going to tackle, and please keep your comments coming to us using hashtag #TheSquareRW. The first comment we're going to look at is the AFCFTA and geopolitics across the continent against a backdrop of COVID. So trading under the African Continental Free Trade Area is set to begin next month, January 1st. 2021, and so far more than 30 countries have ratified this agreement, which aims to connect 55 countries, creating a market of 1.3 billion people on the continent. Of course, this comes against the backdrop of increased geopolitical tensions, not only in the region, but also across the continent. We've seen this especially with various elections that have been going on this year that are still happening as well as the sting of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has really hit businesses and economies hard. So based on these factors, and I'm going to start with you, Brenna, based on these factors, what are your thoughts on what economic and political measures, and I'll focus here on the region in East Africa, political and economic measures the East African region can take based on all this, what I've just said, to make the AFCFTA a reality, to make this promise come true in the ensuing years?
I think if we look at the trend, it's not as bad as it probably looks in the media, because from the time the agreement was signed, there was a lot of skepticism around whether we would get the ratifications. So what we've seen, actually, countries have been working very hard on the ratifications. And let us remember, it's very difficult to negotiate trade, even in the advanced economies that have whether it's the European Union or the other continental trade, US, and it takes time. It's difficult, and I think what helps is that it's gradual. The implementation is gradual. So, one, I'm optimistic, at least given that despite COVID, we saw that countries were still looking at it. Technical teams involved in negotiations, and it was actually, COVID made it logistically almost impossible, because you have teams are not meeting, then you have the infrastructure issues around people meeting virtually, and then the time differences across the continent. So I'm very proud of the progress that has been made so far. Now, that said, of course, there are challenges that now the countries will have to address around the implementation. One, we know that the pandemic has limited options for countries in terms of resources, but when it comes to trade, again, we saw that the pandemic helped with the digital migration. Now, I think the digital migration that we've seen as a result of the pandemic will continue to be very important as we move towards the implementation of the CFTA, because, again, we don't know when the pandemic will end. Africa's prospects around access to the vaccine are still, I don't know how to categorize it. We're still reliant on the goodwill,
exactly.
the goodwill of some of these countries. So it's still out of our control. So meaning that for very long, for maybe the next 1 year or so, we will continue to, if we have to move trade forward, it will have to be digital. So I'm glad that the pandemic pushed digital penetration, and we've seen a lot of services come online. So there's an opportunity there around e-commerce, and hopefully we'll continue to see the push towards setting up the digital infrastructure across the continent. Now, going back to the political issues and the geopolitics, I think that the COVID situation, in a way, is a blessing, because countries have limited options. Let us recall that the continent for a very long time has failed to trade with itself. Now, CFTA is targeting to raise and increase the share of trade from approximately, I think, 18% to around 50% gradually over time. Now, with the difficulty right now around trade logistics, I think it's going to force African countries to work together, because if you're looking at trading with Europe or America, it's going to be more difficult. So in a way, I feel that despite the issues around politics, we'll still see countries being forced to work together. Because again, we know from studies that have been done so far by agencies like UNECA that the best way out of the pandemic is increasing intra-Africa trade.
Absolutely.
So I feel that despite the issues around, instability, we'll see some countries again move forward. And we cannot expect that everybody will come on board. And it's good that we already have champions across the continent. Of course, Rwanda is one of them. So if you look at the continent, we have pockets of champions who we really needed to move the agreement forward. So I'm very optimistic looking at the progress that has happened so far, despite the geopolitics. And I feel that the pandemic will force countries to rethink their options. Again, because as we deal with the health crisis, we have an economic crisis. Now, we know the link between creating economic opportunities and security. If you don't create jobs, definitely there's a security risk there. So I feel that the future is bright. It doesn't mean it will be perfect, but again, because we already have champions who are committed to the cause, they will move forward, and then the other countries will also join. And this is what we've seen even with Europe. You have a few countries that are committed to the cause, and then along the way you'll have the other countries join. Now, there are threats, of course, and there are risks to this, because we've seen even as countries are negotiating as a continental bloc, there are bilateral trade deals, which, in my view, I feel undermine the bigger vision. Yes, yeah. Yes. Countries, for whatever reasons, of course, the agreement allows that. They have a right to have third-party deals, but bilateral trade deals, in my view, undermine the spirit of integration. So how they address that, I think, will be key. Secondly, how they address the existing infrastructure deficit, not just in terms of hard infrastructure, but also, again, because we are seeing the shift towards digital trade. Most countries on the continent still lag behind in terms of digital infrastructure. So having that in place, again, will be key to push trade forward.
Very valid points. Bernard, Charles?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I think In 1995, when the late Nelson Mandela was president of South Africa, at the launch of the Rugby World Cup that they hosted and successfully hosted for that matter, he said, sports speaks a language that no other politician can speak. Now my point to link this with with Africa free continental trade area is the only language that defies politics is sports. Now, that's why you will see that we will be at war or we'll be quarreling with all our neighbors, but when it comes to the East African military games, all countries will participate, despite the fact that some heads of state will miss out from the East African Heads of State Summit. Yeah. That Iran and the USA will meet in the World Cup, but they will never shake hands at the UN General Assembly.
Of course not.
Right. So, where I'm going with this conversation is business and trade will never be divorced from politics. However, in addition to sports, there's one extremely important component of food. And you'll actually realize that when it comes to essentials moving around, even at the height of our problems, say with Uganda, certain food items, processed and unprocessed, were finding their way across their borders, either formally or informally. You look at the fleet of trucks that are trying to wade their way through the kilometers of the blockade between Uganda and Kenya on the borders, and a lot of this is essential items. So it's very important for us to sort of put our realism hat as far as the CFTA is concerned and say, what are those things that we really must do? Put away the politics. You can't necessarily put away the politics because issues of leadership might undermine the bigger picture. And I'll give practical examples. If in a certain country the Minister of Finance belongs to a different political party than the president, they may decide that no, we are not going to grow potatoes, but we will invest in a university in the region where the prime minister comes from, So it's not very often that you have, and I stand to be corrected, and at the risk of bragging, it's Rwanda that has the politics of consensus, that we'll all agree that this is one direction we are taking and we will all go in that direction. Now, CFTA is suffering from that in the absence of the politics of consensus, we are not going to go in the same direction. So it is very, very easy for one country one critical country that has either access to the sea or access to digital plugging into the rest of the countries, or access to a particular cash crop that will feed the rest of the region, and I'll give East Africa as an example. And if that country has internal squabbles or is going through an election, you will find that the rest of the countries will suffer. So it's the issue that needs to be addressed as far as the survival of CFTA is concerned is predominantly around strengthening our leadership institutions and our leadership in general, and the respective governance structures of whatever country. So I think that's the biggest problem that we have as far as CFTA is concerned. The reason is good, and that's why it's very, very difficult to fight it, because the raison d'etre is a no-brainer. But politics is politics, and you will not you will not fight it. So does it mean that we should drop it? Definitely not. But in my opinion, let us concentrate on those areas where we can win. Food, amongst other social aspects. The digital areas that Bana speaks about do not touch everybody's everyday being. But food touches everybody on a daily basis. So some of those things, I think, are where we have quick wins, and it's a lot easier to make our scores.
Absolutely, I like the way you put it. Like let's these low-hanging fruits.
Yes.
You know, they're right there. Let's utilize them. And you know, before we go to the next point, Brian, I just like your point and listening to you on how COVID has kind of fast-tracked this whole concept of the AFCFTA, where we have no choice but to work with each other. The issues of, you know, borders remaining closed to various neighbors for, you know, whatever political reasons, I think it would be a big misstep if in 2021 this sort of issues still abound. We need to, like you said, it's economic crisis. It's a health crisis. Economic crisis cannot piggyback on it based on, you know, the geopolitics of the region. So, like we keep on saying on the show, there's a silver lining of this pandemic, and hopefully it's something that will force not only in the East African region, but across the continent, countries have to work together. We now need to look more than ever inward on our systems based on this pandemic that has forced us to do so. So I'm also optimistic, like you said, and hoping 2021, when it comes to making this agreement a promised reality, something that we'll see at least starting sometime next year.
I think one has to emphasize that it's gradual. So come first January, you know, you may not see a complete shift.
Not a silver bullet. Yes.
But also to his earlier point around putting systems in place, I know that there are discussions around building a credible dispute management mechanism, because of course trade, you always have disputes, and I'm glad that that is also, you know, one of the priorities. And also what we've seen from history is that the more countries trade together, there's that economic interdependence that guarantees, in a way, peace and security. Because if I'm depending on you for certain things, then I may not as the appetite to antagonize.
Exactly, yes, absolutely. You need me, you know, at the end of the day.
So perhaps the other benefit of the CFTA could be, you know, across the continent, as we begin to rely on each other, maybe we'll fight less. Yeah,
I hope so, because it's such a pity. It would be the biggest trade bloc in the world, you know, just on the continental free trade area, and the benefits abound, you know, lifting people out of poverty, being self-reliant, so forth and so on. It would be a pity that this is just delayed further and further. I know it was delayed because of the COVID-19 pandemic, but let's hope 2021 is really a year where, you know, there are true gains made in moving forward with this, the implementation of the AFCFTA. And so the next point we're going to is looking at the economy in Rwanda this year, as well as looking at exciting investments that happened in 2020 despite the pandemic in Rwanda. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from Charles and Brenna on this. So despite COVID-19 in Rwanda, 172 new projects were registered to the tune of $1.2 billion in this year, expected to create more than 22,000 jobs. If you'll allow me to read, some of these key investments include investment projects include Qatar's announcement early on this year that it was acquiring a 49% stake in Rwandair, which is our national carrier. Another big investment as well was the opening in February this year of the one and only Gorilla's Nest in the northern province. This is a luxury hotel owned by the UAE, United Arab Emirates, based investors under the Kerzner International, and also Prime Cement, a cement factory that was opened, you know, a $40 million cement plant that was opened in Musanze. So, Charles and Brennan, I'll start with you, Charles. What is your take on, you know, some of these investments made in Rwanda this year, throughout 2020, despite the pandemic, as well as what are your expectations on investment projects to look out in 2021?
Thank you, Diana. Of course, Rwanda's very aggressive campaign towards commercial diplomacy is beginning to pay off. And I think several years ago when Rwanda was opening up missions abroad and deliberately putting in places commercial attachés.
Yes.
You know, people are, you know, skeptics were like, you know, just creating jobs and, you know, what do you expect out of this? Empowering RDB and what, no one ever had, people gave it a short lease of life. But we're beginning to see this payoff, and that's extremely impressive. I will move slightly away from the statistics that Diana, you've shared about registered projects and talk about realized projects, right? And I think that's where the real meat is.
And I think that's something
yes.
we've discussed multiple times on the
Yes.
square. The numbers are amazing, and you know, it looks sexy on paper and everything, but the ones after 1 year that are still,
yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, the
yes.
fabric. The fabric of Rwanda's existence is predominantly rested around our PR. So, yeah, and that sometimes outshines our true story. Sometimes people underestimate the importance of the hospitality sector. And when you just talk about one and only, even though some deals were not 2020 deals, the multiplier effect into 2020 is huge. And if you talk about hospitality brands, since you talked about a one and only, you know, it's not, you know, Maria Sharapova or the Prince, the Emir of Qatar, the Qatari chief, or all these celebrities who have come to visit us. They would not come if they were going to Diana and Bana and Sons boutique. The brands that are in, whether it is Silverback, Marriott, the Serenas with their multiple properties, Mantis that is now setting up a 5th property, and so on and so forth. If you look at Radisson Blue Parking and global brands that have set foot in Rwanda, everybody is going to be judged by who is in your market. You'll even be surprised that something as small as saying how many KFCs do you have in your country is extremely important. The size of the investment may be very small, that is probably even not $100,000 or $200,000, but somebody will ask you, what clothing brands do you have in your market? And
it's about the brands.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So it's extremely important that a lot of emphasis is put on one, regional, international brands, and that they do well, but also that the local brands are fairly strong enough. So that is one side. But in terms of the size of the investments, and where I started off this conversation was by downplaying Diana's point around the registered investments versus the ones that were done. The huge ones, to me, infrastructure still plays a big role, and government is not good at blowing its own trumpet. And at the risk of applying for a job as the next government spokesperson, the amount of money the government of Rwanda has put around infrastructure. You know, people usually talk about enabling environment without giving it its due weight. Today, I drove around Chibagabaga, and that's just in Kigali City. I saw that the number of kilometers of
tarmac roads.
Tarmac roads that were previously dirt roads 2 years ago. The head of state, while giving the State of the Nation address last week, the number of callers and comments that were talking about roads that they expect to have been tarmacked that are not yet tarmacked, and the pledge he made that they should be tarmacked. And then I had the opportunity of visiting Bugesera Airport about 2 months ago. and then further on, Rwanda, and so the volume of infrastructure development that the government of Rwanda is doing is, I think, where actually, in my opinion, that's where the deals of the year are. The volume of money that has been spent on infrastructure projects, whether it is internet connectivity, roads, our airports, and you can even take it a notch higher and say the subsidies that we give to our transport sector and so on and so forth. So to me, I think somebody needs to be hired to blow the government trumpet,
to toot the horn
or
a bit
fired
louder.
for not blowing it, because I think government has done a fabulous job, and in as far as that is concerned. You know, when you talk about private initiatives, these would never have happened if that enabling environment around the government was not there. Because I'll tell you, for example, the huge problem that Prime Cement faces around clinker is enormous. If the supply chain was not sorted with good roads and warehousing for Prime Cement to be able to move its product from their factory in Musanze through the entire country, we would not be having this discussion. Yeah, so I think in terms of investment, let's not underplay the size and the impact of the infrastructure. I know Bana is going to say that what else would they be doing? That's their job.
Exactly. The government is doing its job. And let us not forget, they ask for this job. Yeah? Now, in case they don't fulfill the job, we'll get disappointed. But this is what they ask for. You know, when the RPF goes out there, it presents its manifesto. And we buy into the manifesto. And we vote the manifesto. So
the job is not done entirely by RPF.
I mean, it is the RPF-led government. Let's be clear about that.
Yes.
Yeah. So they're doing their work. They are doing what we, entrusted them to do, and that is why they will crack the whip when they feel, things are not going according to plan. Because again, one key lesson from the pandemic is citizen trust in government. We've seen governments struggling to convince their populations about the scale of the problem, just because the public opinion around government is another opportunity to steal. So for the government of Rwanda, I feel they're in a privileged position because they are coming from a place where there's record. Now, going back to investment, I don't have a lot of comments around the investments that you listed, but I feel that, as we have said before, we would benefit from a report from RDB that makes clear the value of this investment, beyond just saying 200 jobs. And what is the true value of these investments? Because, and when we start looking closely at the true value, we'll say we have maybe 100 Rwandan companies that have indirectly maybe benefited from this big deal. We have maybe 1,000 households that are benefiting indirectly, because that tells the full picture. But if we continue to be obsessive about these big numbers, in my view, we fall into the trap of GDP, for instance. We continue to hear, you have GDP of maybe double digits, but then people do not feel that growth, Nobody eats GDP, yeah? So I feel that when we start tracking investment, we need to move away from just statistics and actually paint the real picture. And the evidence is there. We saw, for instance, with the Volkswagen deal, there are women drivers. For the first time, we saw actually a company come in, and they were very deliberate in terms of recruiting women. That is the true value that we're looking for. if someone can highlight that, then we know that is progress, you know.
Yeah.
So I feel that beyond the general picture, like he was pointing, you know, the picture around
PR.
the PR, there's actual work that is happening, and
there's a story
you know,
to tell.
Yes, and
Yes.
there is a story to tell. The other deal, actually, for me, which was quite interesting, also, is the second phase of the tea project in Nyaruguru. You know, with Unilever.
And the Wood Foundation.
Yes, but it's quite an impressive project. You know, but again, the detail of the implementation of the project. Of what value is the project leaving to the communities? You know, I'm still insisting on revenue sharing.
I know you mentioned that in the last show.
Yes.
Yes.
You know, it is good that we get these big brands, but we have to try as much as we can to make sure that our communities really benefit.
Absolutely.
You know.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yes, we are desperate. There's a lot of competition in attracting investment, but let us try as much as we can, because it's absurd, to be honest. If you have these big names across the country and around them you see poverty, in my view, it's a problem. You know, and so when you look at, for instance, the where you have the posh tourism happening, we need to do more for those communities. We need to do more. They need to really feel that they are part of the growth that is happening around them.
I want to say two comments, really, and I want to make two comments, sorry. And the first one is around our efforts in driving our marketing efforts. And the second one is around the point Bana just raised, the communities around where we've made huge impact investments. Now, we've spent billions of money, and I fault my friend Obadia around value for money audits, because he's very quick to say, you know, Ewasa, Wasak, and all these other guys. I have not yet seen a report around PSG money or Arsenal money on Visit Rwanda on the sleeve, and you know, to see the value that Bana is talking about. You know, we spent X amount. How much are we getting? Even if we are getting zero in year 2, at what point did we intend? Because
to start expecting returns.
Yes, marketing efforts do not result into immediate sales.
Of course not.
Right?
Yes.
But they should ultimately result in sales. Some of the impacts may not be as tangible. Yeah, and it's very easy for me to argue that the reason why Vivendi has signed on the RDB Cultural Village is because Canal Plus increased its viewership from 100,000 to 200,000 people. Probably that's the reason, right? But we still, and this is amongst a few times that I agree with Bana, that we need to compare like for like, and this is where I feel that the Auditor General sort of lacks, and I'll give another example. So I am 100% sure that the reason why we are expanding Amahoro Stadium to create an entire sports village is because we are beginning to reap fruits from the money we put into the Kigali Arena. But I also want to understand, as a taxpayer, that the money that we put into expropriating people in Gahanga is not going to be put to waste because there was a scheme to do a sports village in Gahanga. Yes, the sport, I'm very close to cricket, was done there, but now they're out there in the wilderness. There's tens of hectares of land that are not developed. Where is that value that Bana is talking about? I'll even take it a notch higher. if you look at the master plan around the sports village of Remera, we're going to get rid of Petit Stade, we're going to get rid of the tennis courts that are down there. There are guys who are wasting a lot of space teaching people how to drive in the middle of town. They should be wherever they are supposed to be. It's a private business. But there is a police station that is not even 3 years old, that is a model police station that I'm unreliably informed that is also going to be raised. So where's the value? Where is the value in there? And I think these are some of the critical questions that we need to be asked, and that we need asked and answered around that. But so that's on the one side of value for money and return. But the second one is, and where I will disagree with Bana, is I have family in Musanze, and I have business interests in the general area, so I travel to Musanze fairly frequently. The livelihoods of people around the Chiniji area have changed. Some of the best schools we have in this country are in Chiniji. Some of the best medical facilities, the quality of life. Some of the areas where you actually move into and you don't see children walking barefooted or children malnourished are around Chiniji.
And that's also because of the tourism
and that's because
industry.
The tour, by design, what used to be Otepen, that is now RDB, deliberately reinvests a portion of their proceeds into the community.
Absolutely. And I think Berna is aware of that, but she's just saying...
She's stubbornly refusing to acknowledge.
No. I think she's aware of that. I think she's aware of that, but she's saying push the envelope further with new investments that kind of replicate the same thing.
Because what stops us from...
communities, do the same thing that's happening in Kinigi.
What stops us from doing the same that we've done in tourism, doing it when it comes to the other sectors? Why can't we do it for tea?
Okay, very quickly, because before we go to the next part of the topic, I just want to read a couple of tweets coming in from our tweeps on Twitter. The first one, if you can have that on our screens, please, comes from Eric, who says, I won't go into tonight's details, but I want to take the opportunity to say a big thank you to the Square team before 2020 ends. You guys are quite smart. Keep feeding us on the best brilliant ideas ever. Cheers, guys. Thank you very much, Eric. Thank you for tuning in. It's been an amazing almost 3 years, and we look forward to 3 more. The next tweet coming in is from Jackson. Jackson says that... I like this review of 2020. I would like you to reflect a bit about the new Ubudehe categorization, even if it is not a burning issue. But I know some people still complaining about its implementation, comparing it to the previous one. We have a couple of more tweets. We have one from Richard Wodira. If we can have it just very quickly on our screens. But just very quickly to the person who was talking about Ubudehe, we'll come back to that. The tweet from Richard, who says, hi guys, I'm surprised that you did not touch on the potential of cannabis production for therapeutic reasons as a unique FDI and export of medical cannabis for export and seeking exports to the US and EU markets. Rwanda has the land, the processing, regulations, and potential. I think Richard missed an entire show on this particular topic earlier this month, so we'll orient you to that, where we had that discussion. Looking at the introduction of cannabis. Exactly.
In Richard's opinion, I think that's what he's trying to insinuate.
Yes. He's absolutely right. And then we have another tweet from Alois, who says that thanks for bringing this burning issue, talking about COVID-19 under 2020 review. Though it reaped fear in people, but economically people learned how to save. Also, technology, ICT emerged in all activities. So just very quickly, we are going to go to the last part of the discussion, and this is on a more personal note from the Square resident panelists, and it's really to look at, COVID-19. The percentage of conversations we've had on this show since the year began, a large percentage has been linked to the pandemic, whether it's education, whether it's health, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's entertainment. Everything has been linked around this pandemic that has changed all our lives, has touched on businesses, has touched on economy, and across all sectors, we've seen major changes, especially to the welfare of citizens. So my question to both of you, and I'll start with you, Charles, is your personal lessons learned or your key takeaways that you obtained in 2020, and some of your general expectations for the next year, very briefly before this last part of the conversation comes to a close.
First of all, I want to apologize to everybody who was listening to us when COVID-19 sessions of the Square began. I ferociously, week in, week out, uttered the word guesswork. Now, and again, without mincing words, I think policing COVID was guesswork, but justifiably it was guesswork because we did not know where we were coming from. We knew the situation in which we were at the time, but we did not even anticipate that we would get to Christmas and New Year and would be having deaths in the numbers in which we have them today. So the guesswork was guaranteed. But then, so that is on one side. Now, I think one of the best things that has happened to our economy is COVID. It may sound a bit sarcastic, but individually, in my own business, individually, in my family, but also from a general perspective of the economy, I think we would never have thought that it would be easily possible to move around without cash in your pocket. I can't remember the last time I had 5,000 francs in my pocket.
It's true.
Does that mean I'm poor? Probably yes. Does that mean I'm broke? Probably not. So I think there's so many positives that we've drawn out of the COVID and the COVID situation. But from a more strategic point of view, I think we need to appreciate that, and I think Ban alluded to this very briefly at the beginning of the show when we were talking about the CFT and the opportunities that are there, is around digitizing our businesses, digitizing our economy. I still feel a lot of pain that Irembo and all the other services still, they have tried as much as possible to go as paperless as they would like to be. While in the medical space, we still heavily rely on paperwork. So I think that's really the opportunity that COVID has taught us, that how digitally ready are we. I was extremely excited that in the last cabinet meeting, there were chief digital officers that were appointed across different various government departments. I think that means that we need to be ready for the next step. So that's extremely exciting. And would it have happened before COVID? Probably not at this time. So that's my takeaway in as far as COVID is concerned, that it has fast-tracked our digital preparedness towards doing business, but also some of the things that are very, very personal. And I think that's the question you have taught us, you posed to us, Diana. My daughters at home, some things as simple as feeding habits, schooling habits, what this one likes and what the other one does not like. Sometimes you get a little bit detached from some of these things, but also appreciating the role of teachers.
I think for every parent, that's a major key lesson.
Exactly.
Appreciating the role of teachers.
Appreciating the role. And then even on a lighter note, understanding your neighbors, Sometimes you say, oh yeah, Bana is my neighbor. Okay, that's fine. She lives in house number 14. I live in house number 12. That's it. But understanding that, okay, you need to know what's up with your neighbor. So it has humbled us to remind us about the importance of life and the very, very basic things for which we exist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one of the, just listening to you, it's a bit ironic that the pandemic, you know, its key nature is to limit social interaction based on social distancing, to make, you know, these human bonds we usually have even further apart physically. But the irony is that in as much as it does that, it also makes us realize the importance of the people closest to us. For me personally, I, you know, became closer to friends, to family, Zoom calls with family, checking in on family, that sort of thing, even though the very nature of the pandemic is really about that sort of thing, distance between human beings. But invariably, it just makes you also understand that family really, and close, you know, connections with people is everything we have. It's one of the most fundamental and important aspects of life. Berna, over to you.
For me, it's been a moment of reflection, and I mean it's almost 12 months or so down the road. I think it's now clear to almost everyone how privileged we are as Rwandans because of the leadership of this country. I remember, I mean, right into the pandemic, almost 2 or 3 months into the pandemic, I was working with someone in the US. And here, the government was saying, you know, please, if you have symptoms, we can test. Busy trying to contain the pandemic. And my colleague in the US was saying, we can't even get to test if we suspect that we have a problem. You know, you make the call and no one is coming to you. And this is the US. Yeah. So for me, the pandemic has really made me appreciate, you know, what it actually means to have visionary and citizen-centered leadership. You know, because right from the beginning, it's been how do we protect our people? And that has been clear. Now, we can't say the same across our continent. We can't say the same across the world. We know that there are governments that didn't actually pay attention to the pandemic and continue not to pay attention to the pandemic. And as a result, you're seeing many people dying. So for me, that has been quite a humbling revelation. The second one relates to, again, the privilege of being in the knowledge-based economy. When they announced the lockdown, for many people who depend on, you know, day-to-day casual work, who are a bigger part of us, they couldn't do anything. You know, as we sang the song, you can work from home, you can work remotely. These people don't have choices. But here we are, some of us, you can actually work from wherever you are.
Yeah.
You know, so for me, that also was quite, you know, quite humbling to be in the knowledge-based economy. But on the other hand, I think it's also a challenge for whoever is in charge of, you know, addressing the gap. You know, how do we ensure that we have more people that are in the knowledge-based economy? Because no matter what we do, if we still have, you know, a bigger proportion of people that depend on casual work, who live hand to mouth, it's not the last pandemic. So life will be extremely difficult.
A personal takeaway? I know you've kept it very impersonal. Anything you'd like to share with the audience?
I'm just grateful, to be honest.
Yeah. And just generally, very quickly, we've run out of time. What do you look forward to in 2021? What are some of your key expectations, just broadly speaking? Very quickly.
I have very little faith in terms of the quick recovery of the economy because of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. So I fairly pessimistic. That's number one. What I look forward to in 2021 is, so 2020, one of my major disappointments, and I'm going to be very, very quick on this one.
Yes, please.
And I want 2021 to be a lot better, is we have not fared very well from a judicial perspective in terms of especially things to do with something as simple as a right to bail.
Pre-trial detentions.
Yeah,
we discussed this in detail on the
Yes.
square, I remember.
I am so hoping
This
that
changes.
it is something that can change into 2021.
100%
Yeah.
on board with you, Charlie.
Yeah.
Very quickly, Brenna, key expectations in 2021? Very quickly.
One, I hope that the government will pull all stops, break the bank, and spend more. You know, it's the only way you get people back to work.
On what banner?
On what?
I don't know why they'll break the bank, but they just have to do it.
But spend on what?
Spend on whatever it is
Yes.
to get people back to work.
Let's have this discussion next week on Wednesday,
Yes.
and be specific with your expectations. We have 2 tweets to read very quickly. The first is from Lucy Mbabazi, and she says that if you can have that on the screens very quickly. Run the Square, great discussion and thanks for the good content always. I agree with Charles. Growing the road network, key infrastructure for trade should be celebrated. It would also be good to know the state of local businesses too. I'm sure there's stats to celebrate. We have another tweet also coming in from someone called Joseph. Joseph says that, hey folks, I'm truly a big fan of the Square. You all have very constructive conversations. I wish here in my country, Burundi, we could have this talk. Joseph, thank you for watching all the way from our sister country, Burundi. So these are all the tweets that we have coming in. Thank you so much for always supporting the Square with your comments, your suggestions. As you know, Burning Issues Edition is every last Wednesday of the month, and we have this conversation based on topics you, the public, on social media, on WhatsApp groups, and that sort of thing, you know, put forward to the production crew in terms of how to design the conversation. So thank you very much for that. Charles, happy holidays, happy festive season to you, happy new year.
I want to break the ice a little bit.
Yes.
I want to suggest that after you're done with thanking our sponsors,
Yes.
we all unisonly say a happy new year to our fans.
Fantastic. Always a pleasure to have you on the show. Verna, always a pleasure to have you on the show.
Yeah.
To our sponsors, Uzi Collections and Bourbon Coffee, thank you for supporting the show for almost the last 3 years. Forever indebted to your partnership. That massive thanks to RBA, you know, as we come, Rwanda Broadcasting Agency, as we come to the end of the year. And on Charles's cue, wishing all our viewers a very happy new year. Have a good night and see you all again next week.
Yeah.
In the new year.
In the